to the Friday Frothy. What a fantastic show.
Corey, Garden and Landscaping. Thank you, Corey, for everything you've done, mate. You've done an amazing job. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I'd like to call Garry Baker from the Melbourne Demons.
It's a grand old flag, it's a high-flying flag, it's the emblem for me and for you. It's the emblem of the team we love, the team of the red and the blue.
That's the longest song in history. Welcome, Garry Baker.
How's that?
There we go.
Yeah, well, I just said it is the longest song in history, and the way they're going, they'll be playing it for about 5 fucking years.
Any Melbourne Demons supporters here in the crowd? Trent Gray, you a Melbourne supporter? Yeah, right, there we go.
Everyone at the moment's a Melbourne supporter.
Get on them, guys, they look bloody good. I'm not going to embarrass myself tonight by saying I'm a North Melbourne supporter. Oh shit, I've just done it. We're looking absolutely fantastic in the next 10 years. But Garry, you played 147 games, 126 goals, played for the Footscray, Melbourne and Sydney. But if I'm going to ask you first of all, mate, where does the nickname Bull come from?
Bull, well, I told this little story. I was lucky enough to, I don't know, Cody, have you been on the front bar yet?
No, I'm not old enough.
Oh.
I just can't believe that we've got a premiership player here, Trent Crowe, and I'm a bloke that just bummed around for fucking 15 years and never played in one final, mate, and I was one of the first ones to get on the front bar. But
but your reputation precedes you, Garry.
mate, when I want the pigs, I'll rattle a bucket collar. No, I told this little story. I got asked on the front bar a couple of years ago, how did I get the nickname Bull? And I had two nicknames. I had my nickname Bull, which my father gave me when I was just a little fella, and as the years went by and I sort of started to get a bit bigger and bigger, and I always thought that the reason I got the nickname Bull was because I was big and tough and strong and all that sort of stuff. And one day I said to him, my old man's nickname was Straubs, and I said, Straubs, I said, people keep asking me what, how I got my nickname, and Bull, and I said, is it because I'm big and strong and tough like I am? He said, no, mate. He said, I'll tell you how you got it. He said, when you're about 3, he said, you still had your dummy and your bottle and all that sort of stuff. And he said, you were the laziest little prick I'd ever bloody seen in my life. And he said, when you used to drop your bloody dummy and your bottle and you couldn't reach it, you used to go, boo! He said, so that's how you got the nickname Bull. But I had a nickname when I went to Footscray. Like we said just a few moments ago, I played for 3 clubs. I was born and bred in a little place called Leongatha, which is about 2.5 hours southeast of Melbourne. And all I wanted to do as a young fella, obviously, was play footy, because my old man was a great old country footballer, and he played for Fitzroy Reserves. If anyone's old enough to remember, Fitzroy Footy Club had a team back there one time, and he was born and bred in Fitzroy. He played the Fitzroy Reserves before he went away in the Navy. And when he came back from the Navy, he was the first ever paid captain coach of Leongatha Footy Club in about 1948 or 49, so he shifted down to the country. And so that's where I grew up. And I was born in 1953. And people say, how come you barrack for Melbourne? Because I always barracked for Melbourne. and I was lucky enough to play with them, well, unlucky enough to play with them, because we never won a game for 10 years old yet. But I still always loved the footy club, and
Sorry, Gary, you could be playing for North Melbourne right now.
well, right now, but you've had your bloody fun in the sun, mate. You won those flags when you bought all those players that you shouldn't have got anyway.
Here we go.
And anyway, being a 53 bloke, obviously Melbourne played in the grand final in 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59 and 60, and also in 1964. So being in that era of growing up, obviously who else am I going to barrack for? North Melbourne, you know, no way. So that's why I became a Melbourne supporter. But growing up in Leongatha, back in those times, it was all zoning. So Leongatha's area was Footscray Footy Club. So if you ever were good enough to be invited to train and then hopefully get a game with a VFL club, as it was in those days, you had to go to the side that you were zoned to. And I was zoned to Footscray, so that's why I went to Footscray. Had 2.5 years or thereabouts at Footscray Footy Club. My first coach in 1971 was Teddy Whitten, the great Ted Whitten. So I played under Ted Whitten in 71. In 1972 and 73, Ted got the sack after 71, and they appointed Bobby Rose, who was a legendary Collingwood name, and some say the greatest player ever to play football for Collingwood. So he coached Footscray for about the next 4 or 5 years, but I was there for 2 years, and then I got traded to Melbourne in 1974. I got traded with another guy, a guy called John Keast. His name. Now there's 3 of us actually got traded for one Melbourne player, and there was a guy called John Keast who never played a game. A little bloke called Charlie Pagnoclo. In 1970 he won the Recruit of the Year, and myself, and they called it what they call it then, the Walpermuir paint trade. It was buy one get 2 free, you know. And to this day I don't know who was bought and who was fucking given away for nothing. Yeah. But I did have I had 9 years at Melbourne. As I said, we never made the finals in that whole 9 years. We went pretty close a couple of times. We produced some pretty good players, Robbie Flower, God rest his soul, Greg Wells, Gary Hardiman. We had some great players there. I was lucky enough in 1978, back in the time, maybe before Crody, I'm not sure whether the Big V was around when you were playing with them, mate?
No, 10 years off.
10 years off. Well, I did manage to, just to let everyone here know, who can't remember me playing, how good I was. I did win Melbourne's 1978 Best and Fairest, and also, yeah, just Google.
I've done that training. It's all here, it's all Google.
And also I was lucky enough to represent the Big V twice, once in 1978, once in 1981. Now around about that time, they were sort of giving Big V jumpers away because they had firsts and seconds and third grade sides, because the Vicks reckoned they were that good that they could field sort of 3 sides. So one side would go to bloody Canberra, that was the third Big V side, and another side would go to Tassie and the second Big V side. But if you do Google me, I actually played in the A side. I never ever played in the B or the C side.
Gary, just want to jump in. When you're playing the game, what position you play? Just for the guys who don't know there, because I Googled you and I know.
Yeah, well, believe it or not, it's the first time I met Tread Crow tonight. Obviously, used to watch him play an year or 2 after me, and we're pretty well nearly eye to eye, Tread and I. But back in my day, I was a big bloke, and I'm still a sort of reasonably big bloke. I'm not saying where, but I'm still sort of very, thereabouts. But 6'4", and I was a ruckman. I grew up playing ruck all my junior football, I was a ruckman. When I went to Footscray, I never played anywhere but in the ruck. When I went to Melbourne, I didn't play anywhere but the ruck. I went to Sydney Swans and basically played as a ruckman. I played 2 games for Victoria, played as a ruckman, 6'4", and now I see blokes like Botten, Pally and Fife and all those blokes, Cripps and all them are 6'5", 6'6", they've never played in the fucking ruck. They wouldn't know what it was like to play in the ruck. And then I see some kids being, drafted, he's, 203 centimetres. I don't even know what fucking 203 centimetres is.
How are you feeling over there, Ian? Sorry,
all I know, it's fucking tall. And you know what? They say, oh, is a utility or a centre-half back or something like that. Even the 6'10" blokes don't play in the fucking ruck anymore. It's just unbelievable.
Absolutely amazing, yeah. Hey, as you guys have heard, we do a show on YouTube called Friday Frothy, and just recently we interviewed Alan Johnson. I don't know if you played with Alan.
The Melbourne Alan Johnson.
Yeah, you played with John. Fantastic bloke. He played on the other wing from. He was
an absolute champion. He won a best and fairest at Melbourne.
Yeah.
Only champions do that.
Fantastic. I know another guy who won a best and fairest at Melbourne. I think it was 1978. His name was Garry Baker. Is that correct? Mate, can you tell us a couple of stories, about some of the other team members that you played with, and also Ron Barassi, you obviously were coached by Barras.
Yeah.
Good days, bad days?
Well, Barras came along in 1981. Prior to Barras, we had Carl Dittrich was captain coach actually. Big Carl, always remember Big Carl. He had the later in his years, he had the headband on. He was Carl Dittrich was probably the toughest player I've ever played against. Early in his career, he was always a champion. Early in his career, I think in his first game, he played his first game against Melbourne in maybe a final or something, and he was only about 17 and he got best on the ground, and he stamped his mark as a future champion, Carl Dittrich. In his latter years, his last half of his career, he became what you could do back in those days and be a bit of a thug and be feted as a really hard thug of a footballer, and that's what he ended up being in the end. He just wanted to hurt as many people as he possibly could. I remember one day before a game at the MCG, he put us in a room about as square as from the pool table to this, put us all in a room. He put the Rocky Buddy theme on when it was, fashionable to sort of put the Rocky theme on. He turned all the lights out. This is.
Someone's picture of it. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, that's a rip of that one.
Sorry.
No, that's all good. No, any photos you see, mate, just let me know because I'll still love looking at them. And also it doesn't look anything like me anymore as well, so that's another great thing. No, but he put us in this bloody room, he turned the lights out, you couldn't see one thing, honest to God. And we're in this room and he put this movie on, he just said, just run round at one another. And this is, this was in the 70s, or the early 80s or whatever it was. So this was our warm-up for a game, And then when the lights come on, blokes had to go into the medical room, get stitched up and all this sort of stuff. And that was before the game. So Big Carl was, he was pretty mean, and actually his last game in 1981, he went out with a bang. We played Collingwood at the MCG and he got reported about 5 or 6 times. Honest to God, he just took everyone out. He just didn't bloody care at all. As great a player as he was, St Kilda won 1 premiership in 1966, and Big Carl missed out because he was suspended. So you just can't do those sort of things, mate, anymore.
As a player, how would you feel in that situation? You finally make a final or a grand final and you don't play. You'd just be devastated, wouldn't you?
Well, you would. Obviously, you would be totally devastated to miss out. But there's players that do it. I remember Bernie Evans at Carlton. He got suspended on the eve of a final, and they won the grand final. There's, I think, John Coleman even, you know, the league is littered with players that get suspended. Phil Carman, 1977, who I did play with because he came over to Melbourne, I think in about 78 or 79. He was a champion footballer. In his first year, I think he played about 12 games, missed 10 and lost the Brownlow by 1 or 2 votes or some bloody thing. But for those that can remember, and I'm sure there's some Collingwood supporters here that love hearing about heartbreak, because every year's a heartbreak for Collingwood. 77, he got suspended in the second semi-final. He got 3 weeks reported. Collingwood ends up drawing the 1977 grand final without the best player in the competition, so they would have won the game if he had played, and they got smashed in the grand final. So, you know, the league's littered with those sort of stories.
Mate, quickly, your jump number. You always had number 1 through all the clubs that you went to, is that correct?
Well, I had number 1 at Melbourne. I had number 27 at the Bulldogs at Footscray, number 27. It was just, a number is, like, you're given a number, especially when you're recruited from the country and you're only 17 or 18, you're not going to go there and all you want to do is get a game in the thirds or the seconds. Let alone go and demand what sort of number you want. But when I went to Melbourne, I got asked if I wanted number 1 because the year before, because we know this is a cricket club here, and I haven't touched on my cricket career yet, have I? I'm not sure.
I didn't see that on Google.
But, you know, I wasn't a bad cricketer either.
Batsman and bowler.
Oh, look at it. But getting away from my cricket ability, the guy that wore number 1, before me, who I did play on the year before, was also a ruckman and about my size. His name was Max Walker. And old Tangles Walker, obviously we all know, was a legendary Australian first change, googly type, fast medium pace bowler. And he played 99 games, senior games at Melbourne Footy Club in the number 1 jumper. And that was the year before I went to Melbourne. It was his last year, obviously, so he retired to take up Test cricket. And so I got presented with the number 1 jumper. And then 9 years later, when Melbourne gave me the arse, which is, I know it's, you know, it's very surprising to know that I did get the arse from my second club in 10 years. I went to Sydney and the number 1 jumper was available there, so I just automatically got it there as well.
What was I going to ask you? I don't know.
What were you going to ask?
I don't know.
How good I was at Sydney?
I had something on the tip of my tongue, but it's gone, let me tell you.
Well, I'll just tell you a little story about my cricket career.
All right, I'll sit back and just think.
No, just one little story about my cricket career. I did play in a premiership at cricket with a side called Inverloch. Has anyone heard of Inverloch? Inverloch, yes. Well, Kate know exactly what Inverloch is. If anyone wants to buy a house in Inverloch, don't go there unless you've got about $10 million or something bloody thing, because it's a bit like that, what's on the screen up there. It's a beautiful little beach area, and we used to live in Inverloch, and I remember we sold our house at Inverloch when Mum and Dad shifted up to Harvey Bay in 1980, about 50 metres from the beach for $15,000. You know, like, Inverloch's just absolutely gone berserk. But we did live at Inverloch, which is only about probably 10 minutes down the road from Leongatha. And so we played for Inverloch Cricket Club. And my father played as well, old Straubs. He was a left arm googly. And I grew up being a leg spin bowler because he was a left arm leggy, and so I bowled leggy as a young fella. But when I went and played football at Melbourne, I've been playing in the VFL for about 6 or 8 years or 9 years or whatever. So you think you're pretty big and strong and tough and all that, so you don't want to bowl leg spin, you want to bowl quick, you know. So I went back to Inverloch on weekends to play cricket and opened the bowling. And I wasn't all that quick, but you know, I was very smart, as you can tell. And so I opened the bowling for Inverloch Footy Club, Inverloch Cricket Club, and we played a side called Wonthaggi, which is the big rivals next door. And obviously the finals in cricket are in March, and the practice games in football are in March as well. So we played a game, the final was Saturday, Sunday, Saturday. And I could play the Saturday and the Sunday, but I couldn't play the following Saturday because we had a practice game at the MCG. So I was unavailable for the third day. So the first day we bat and we make 123, which is not a hell of a lot. And anyway, then the following week they bat. I've opened the bowling. I've taken one early, which probably doesn't surprise too many people. And quite a while later, we've got them 3 for 39. So I've got 2 in the book, and the other opening bowler's got 1. And there's 3 overs to go at the end of the day, and they've gone from 3 for 39, and they're 3 for 116. So we're in a little bit of strife with 3 overs to go and all of next week. So the captain hasn't brought the old man on for quite a while, and I said to him, mate, you've got to bring the old Straubs on because, things are getting a bit desperate. So anyway, we've convinced him to bring the old Straubs on. So old Straubs has come on, who's my father, who at that stage, I'm about 25, he's about 50 odd, I suppose. He's about 50 odd, maybe 50. So he comes on, first ball, bowls a big leggy at the back, bowls this bloke. So they're 4 for 116. So then he bowls 5 or 6, I think they were 8 ball overs in those times. And at the last ball of this third last over of the day, he's bowled one out the other side, bowled this bloke, so he's taken 2 for none, so they've gone from 3 for to 5 for. I've come on the second last over, and I've taken 2 for none in the second last over, and then he's come on and bowled the last over, so at this stage they're 7 for. So he's bowled, the first couple out the back, and the bloke because he could sort of do a little bit with it. Anyway, the end result, he's taken 2 for none in the last over of the day. So they've gone from 3 for 39 to 3 for 116 to 9 for 116. And anyway, so the next week I said, well, I won't be here the next week, so someone can sort of fill in for me. The bloke, the other opening bowler made. The old Straubs has come on, he's bowled 3 bloody wrong-uns and the bloke's gone out this way and he's bowled the other one and he's clean bowled him and we've taken 7 for none to win the game.
Wow.
Yeah, but I don't think I've ever seen that before. But, so anyway, that was my one and only premiership in cricket.
Congratulations. Well done, a round of applause. Come on, please. I'm proud. Yeah, Garry, I remember the question that I was going to ask you, but I've forgotten it after all. It's gone.
Yeah, well, I gave you about 20 minutes to fucking think about it.
No, I didn't forget it. I just used it as a gag. Hey, maybe something about that in England.
Yep.
Was what happened there?
Well,
Who's laughing at who here?
No, it's there's some unfortunate things that happened to you in your footy career, and what happened with me is that in 1978 when I won the best in Fairest and played for the state and did all this sort of stuff, and I was just about, I was about 25 years of age. Didn't think I could do anything sort of too far wrong. I was, taking 12 or 15 marks a game, and because that's how ruckman played back in those days, it was, you try and take 3 or 4 marks a quarter, and it was a funny thing the way you used to do those sort of things.
Can I ask you a question there? With the back when you were playing as a ruckman, were you running up and down like they do, or were you pretty much just staying in the middle? How did you work?
Well, see, but back then you sort of played, because the game's so different today. It's so different. So the ruckman, and the best one at it of all time was a bloke called Garry Dempsey, and I did play with Garry Dempsey for a couple, 2 or 3 years at Footscray. And the reason I went to Melbourne is because Garry Dempsey was the best ruckman in the competition, and the second best, not the second best ruckman in the competition, but the second best ruckman at Footscray when I was at Footscray was a bloke called Barry Round, and he was a legendary ruckman as well. So I was sort of, in behind him, those 2 guys and a few others. But the way that you used to play then, you just used to time, because the ball was always basically kicked to packs and all that sort of stuff. So you just get in the middle of where the bloke was going to kick the ball, and you'd always manage to get to where the ball was going to be. So there were so many more marks taken in football in those days, and as a ruckman you used to pride yourself on, and they used to actually have all these stats in the Herald Sun or the Sun or whatever it was on the Monday, and they'd have who took the most marks on the weekend, and there'd be a tally of the marks week by week by week, and the big fellas always wanted to win that award at the end of the year, so you'd be trying to take as many marks as you bloody could. And that's how blokes like Peter Moore and Graham Teasdale and Dempsey and Graham Moss and all these blokes, they just used to mark after mark after mark, and plus at training, we'd get to training a half an hour or an hour earlier than training started, and you'd have end-to-end kicking, and you'd just be trying to take as many marks as you could, and you become a great mark, a great mark. Now I see big fellas now, they wouldn't even know how to mark half of them, really, it's but, given that, we are fucking old pricks now, and we don't, it's you got to stop yourself thinking, well, it's not how we used to do it, because the young kids know that this is how it's done today, but it's just, honest to God, it's just a complete different game today than the game. The only game that I can still star in is the one that we played the other week, the Relive the Rivalry game. I'm still a bit of a star in that game, because we do play the old style footy, don't we, eh? Isn't that fantastic?
I'll get back to the knee, your injury, but so you still watch the game now, and you obviously don't rate it?
Look, I don't not rate it. It's just a different game to me. And look, I still love footy. I'll always love footy. But I tell you what I do now that I've never ever done is at quarter time turn it on to Netflix. I never used to do that once.
You are
Mind you, we were never watching fucking footy at 10 o'clock at night either. So.
That's correct. I was going to say, you are primed to be a North Melbourne supporter. Switching off at quarter time, that's not what I do all the time.
Alex.
Now, Jeff,
Yes.
can I just quickly interject? Gary, I want to know what the story is with you. You mentioned the Relive the Rivalry game. You were playing for Victoria against Tassie. What's going on there, mate? Trader.
There's no trading there, mate. I'm born and bred in fucking Victoria. Who else are going to apply for Western Australia?
Come on, we've claimed you as our own.
We've had, you can claim me, mate. Everyone wants to claim me. That's my biggest problem at this stage of my life, mate. Everybody wants me. Yeah.
Have you ever? Didn't you play a game for Tassie though? In the Relive the Rivalry?
No. We played 9 Relive the Rivalry games. 9, and I've played all the games for Victoria.
All right.
I wouldn't put one of those rotten fucking mat jumpers on. Be serious.
Oh, mate. Come on. I'm not going to visit your restaurant anymore. I'm not going to have the Barassi steak at your restaurant anymore, Bates.
He wouldn't remember if you had it or not anyway.
All right, back to your injury, mate. You moved to Sydney in 1983,
Yeah.
but you've only managed 6 games there. Is this due to your injury?
Well, I did go to Sydney. I went to the Swans. I basically went there because I had a good relationship with a guy called Ricky Quaid, who was the coach of the Swans at the time. I did play against him. I was sort of a bit of a mate of his, but we had this respect that the Swans went up to Sydney. They just needed someone that had sort of played a fair bit of footy to be more of a bit of a coach. So what I did, I was employed to play in the reserves because I tell you what happened with the Sydney Swans back in 1982. In 1981, the Sydney Swans were South Melbourne Footy Club. South Melbourne that had been around forever and a day. In 1982, the VFL, as it was then, decided to put a side in Sydney. And this is what happened with the Swans. So it was a trial for at least 1 year. They trialled the South Melbourne Footy Club in Sydney. And obviously, as it's all turned out, it was all to do with television rights and all that sort of stuff, because the Swans were played, if we remember, every second Sunday on television. The Swans. So in 1982, the Swans all played in Sydney, but all the players were living in Melbourne. So everyone lived in Melbourne in 1982, playing as the Sydney Swans. So the old South Melbourne footy ground, the old Lakeside Oval, is where they still trained. They still trained, and then every second Sunday they flew up to Sydney to play, and then flew back the next day. And the reserves played at the old junction at the South Melbourne footy ground. Now in 1983, which is the year that I joined the Swans, there were some players that moved to Sydney and some players that stayed in Melbourne. So there was 50% of the club were living in Sydney, because it still wasn't 100% that it was going to 100% work financially and all that sort of stuff. So they had a squad in Melbourne and a squad in Sydney. So the squad in Melbourne trained at the Lakeside Oval. If you got a game and you were living in Melbourne, you flew to Sydney on the Friday night. If you were living in Sydney and you didn't get a game in the seniors and they were playing in Sydney, you flew down to Melbourne to play in the reserves. So that's how the Swans were for the first 2 or 3 years. And then after 3 years of doing that, the club decided that they were going to play as the Sydney Swans out of Sydney, and said to every player, if you want to play for the Swans, you've got to live in Sydney. Now there's blokes like Bernie Evans, who I mentioned earlier, played for Carlton, went to Carlton because he didn't want to live in Sydney. And also David Rees-Jones was another one that said, no, I don't want to live in Sydney, I want to live in Melbourne. So those guys went to Carlton and played, and that's what happened, and then the Swans just built on that. That's how it was. But so from my point of view, why I only played 6 senior games with the Sydney Swans is because I was about 31 years of age, and I'd had a knee reconstruction a couple of years earlier. I never actually got over that. Plus, I was 31 years of age. And it's funny because back in those days, and I know it's not all that long ago, but 31, you were sort of washed up, you know. I see now that Todd Goldstein is about 38, and they're saying next year 3 clubs are going to put him on a 5-year contract, you know. Like, players tend to play longer now, and obviously it's because they don't want to retire, because the money's too good for them. Whereas we both, like, the most money I ever got was the last year I was with the Swans. I got 20 grand. I won the best and fairest at Melbourne in 1978. The following year I signed a contract for $6,000 a year, being the best player in the club. 6 grand.
Yeah,
That was it.
I had this conversation yesterday with Trent. We were talking about brown
He
paper
sold
bags.
his restaurant for $4 million.
Yeah. I'm making up for it now.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that in a
Then it
minute.
was all cash.
In your day, and just saying, on the Friday Frothy we do on YouTube, we interviewed.
I had Sam Fisher working for me last year.
What? Oh jeez! Call the police.
Let's go visit him next week.
We interviewed Rees-Jones on our show, thanks to Kate Jezelenko sitting over there, and he talked a little bit about money being passed under the table and things, and what they did back in his era.
Yeah.
Much that happened with.
Well, I never ever saw that happen. Obviously, Carlton Footy Club You know, they,
You weren't that far.
in all honesty, they had some big money people in that club. Look, I tell you a story. I did hear. I heard this story when it happened, which was 1974, and this is how sort of. It's pretty amazing how this happened, but obviously it was going on all the time. A great friend of mine that come from another club that come to Footscray, he rang me up one day and he said, "Have you been paid?" And I said, "Yeah, I got me cheque for $2,300 for the year." I said, "Why do you ask that?" He said, "Because the club rang me up. This is Footscray Footy Club, and this is a true story. The Footscray Footy Club, this guy was on $14,000 a year, which was a lot of money in 1973, right? I remember I was engaged to a girl for about 5 minutes in 1972, and her cousin bought a terrace house in Footscray for $10,000 in 1972. So at the same time that my mate was on 14 grand a year. So if that terrace place is now worth in Footscray, what, 800 grand? Well, that's what he was getting. That's sort of what it is. Anyway, he like I said, he rang me up, "You've been paid," yeah, because I was, coming down from the bush. You just cop what you were given. It wasn't, I'm demanding fucking this money on a 5 year. I just wanted to play footy, That's all I wanted to do was play footy. You would have played for nothing. I remember going to training and they gave me a cheque for $25 to go and have a feed on the way home, and I thought, fuck, have I made it here? Honest to God, it was so good, And then when you got the fucking bag and the pair of runners, it was like, Jesus Christ. It was, honestly, you just couldn't realise how great it was. Anyway, my mate said, he said, "You got paid." He said, I said, "Have you?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "The club rang me up." He said, said, "Come into the club and we'll give you your cheque for $15,000. And I said, "Yeah, well, that's what, you've come from another club and you're a premiership player at the other club and all that." He said, "Yeah, but then the treasurer rang me up in the afternoon and he said, 'Can you meet me in the car park at Kinnear's Ropes,' which was a big industry where they made big ropes and that in Ballarat Road in Footscray, because I've got you paid." And I said, "Yeah," and he said, "I've gone there and they're giving me $15,000 in cash." Wow. And I said, "What'd you do?" He said, "Well, I don't know what to do." And he ended up doing nothing, so he got paid twice. I'm not joking, he got paid twice, once with a cheque and once with cash, and he never heard one other thing from the club. So the club didn't know that the bloke had paid, and the bloke didn't know that the club had paid.
This sounds like something that would happen in Hawthorne, doesn't it? Just kidding. Wow. Okay, well, would have happened at Carlton for sure. Garry, I've got 2 more questions for you, mate. You've been absolutely fantastic. One of the things, as I said before, we've got Kate Jesselenko sitting over there, and she walked up and met Garry yesterday and said that her father, Alex Jesselenko, said that she had to go and meet Garry and say hello because he actually said that Garry was such a, what would you say? A gentleman. A beautiful person. I'll trace his breath.
And the thing, we're both gentlemen. Kate's father and I are both true gentlemen, but he is a legend. You know that,
Yes,
Yes,
indeed. Mate, 2 questions. First one is your thoughts on an AFL team, and I'm going to ask every guest that comes up here tonight that same question. Your thoughts on an AFL team in Tasmania? Should it go ahead or should it not? And how happy were you to win the flag for Melbourne?
Okay.
Not you, but your team.
Yeah, well, first of all, the Melbourne flag, I was saying to Kate before that I haven't had really much to do with Melbourne Footy Club for a long time because, for one, I've been over here for 30 odd years, and for 2, I played in the era at Melbourne that prior to my going to Melbourne, as I said, in the 50s and 60s, they won flag after flag after flag and played in finals every year and all that sort of stuff. And then in the 70s, we never played in the finals at all once the whole time I was there, and I left Melbourne in 1983, and we still didn't play in finals at all. So it was like, you know, you were playing VFL footy and you were wrapped to do it. Every year you thought maybe next year we'll win the flag or play in the final, but we never ever did. And then in the sort of late 80s and the 90s, Melbourne started to come good again. So the era that I played in was basically a non-era, really. Even though we had some really good players and all that, but even Robbie Flower, who was a champion player, he even at least ended up playing in a final or two, you know, and he deserved it as well, like all players deserve it when they... So my era had never had reunions and all that sort of stuff because we had nothing to fucking celebrate, you know, really. And that's fact. But what the success of the club in the last 12 months has given people like me is the fact that I've all of a sudden sort of thought that the club does appreciate the fact that I was there laying some sort of foundation for them, because, you know, all us older players have been invited back to the club and gone to chairman's lunches and got up and said a few words and all that sort of stuff. So it's made us feel like, you know, we have contributed something to the club. I was lucky enough to get some tickets and not through the club. Because I'm not one of those people who ring a club up and say, can you get me tickets? I've never done that sort of thing. I've always got them off my own back. So I did go over to the grand final. It was a fantastic
So you were there?
I was there. It was a fantastic day. I've got two daughters. One that runs the St Albie restaurant, and my other daughter's a psychologist with the Tasmanian Police. So if anyone here wants to book in, just give me a yell, because you can do it with a bit of money. They're both Melbourne supporters, and they've been saying to me for years and years and years and years and years and years, Dad, when are you going to take us to a grand final? You know, because I've always big note I can get tickets any time. And I said, look, when Melbourne makes a grand final, we've got tickets. And thinking that, you know, we're fucking, you know, my life on this earth, we're never going to make a grand final. And then all of a sudden it happens. So I took my two daughters, and the four of us went over, and we had a great time over there in Perth. And it was so good for them to win the flag. But I did suck everyone in, because I've got a really good friend of mine that come from Tassie she's lived in Perth for a long, long time, and her son works in this. He makes the cardboard cutout premiership cups and all that sort of stuff. That's his business. He does all that sort of stuff. So I met up with her the following day after the grand final, and she gave me this cardboard cup, which was a replica of the cup. So I've had all these photos taken with this cardboard cup, and what Melbourne Footy Club have done, well, what the former players have done, and I tried to describe it to Kate what happens, but they started this bloody thing up. You know about it, don't you? They started this thing up, this Melbourne Football Club past players thing. They started to get the ball rolling with every former past player. So it just snowballed, and in the end, like 10,000 former past players, everyone's texting one another, it's all coming up on this bloody thing. And because I've never ever in my life, I've never ever fucking sent an email or fucking received one. I don't even know what it's called. But it's called some stupid fucking thing. I've got it on here. Robert Pyman, past players in Melbourne football. I'm still getting them today. Andrew Lencielli. I'm still getting them. So everyone sends and everyone reads everything. So what I've done, I've had all these photos taken of me in this cardboard fucking cutout that looks exactly like the fucking premiership cup. So I'm getting all these texts from all these people, you lucky bastard, how'd you get your hands on the cup? and I still get it today, and it's a fucking cardboard cutout. I'm not joking. It's just unreal how gullible some people are. But it does look like the real thing. Like, all my old mates are saying, fuck, how'd you get your hands on the cup? No, the siren hasn't stopped blaring and you got the fucking cup.
Sensational. Mate, just quickly, your thoughts on Tasmanian team?
A Tassie team, look, I don't know if anyone saw, and I don't like going against my daughter, if anyone saw her in the paper yesterday plugging for an AFL team, because, you know, obviously she's not, doesn't give a fuck about the footy side, she just wants more people to go into the restaurant. That's all. But look, my thoughts on it, honest to God, you barrack for North Melbourne. How, like, all due respect, how bad in North Melbourne? We've got the West Coast Eagles. How bad are West Coast Eagles? Like the Gold Coast Suns are just sort of starting to splutter a little bit. We've got the Adelaide Crows, my old mate's old fucking team. Like they're average at best. And there's a lot of other teams that are average. And I just can't see, if we put two more sides, because they want one from Tassie, one from Northern Territory, how are these sides ever going to win a fucking game? Because where is the next 100 players going to come from, for God's sake? Well, we're going to be They'll have to start recruiting out of the relive the fucking rivalry game, for God's sake. Honest to God. Look, I just, like, it'd be great for Tassie in the good old times back in the 60s if we had a bloody side, because everyone wanted to play footy. When was the last time we went for a drive through a fucking suburb and kids are kicking the footy out on the street? It doesn't happen anymore. No one plays footy anymore. They're all in the fucking rooms with the doors shut playing on these things, but I don't even know what they're fucking called. Honestly.
PlayStation and Xbox, just to let you
Is that
know.
what it is? Xbox, eh?
That's what it is. Took me
Well, I tell you what, I'd prefer the fucking sex box anytime. Thank you very much.
Mate, Garry Baker, absolute legend. You're a star, mate. Thank you so much. Round of applause, guys. Garry Baker.